Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting people to log in here. The numbers are piling up quickly. So we want to just give a minute or two just to get people situated before we get started. But I've said it before that we've had record-breaking crowds. Today for sure breaks all records, and we're going to test our Zoom license today. So we'll see how. Hopefully we don't have any technology glitches. But we promised everyone a really good, impactful webinar, and I've been at the warm-up, and I assure you this is going to be one of the highlights of the year. So looking forward to having hearing what our panelists have to say. We're just so fortunate to have such quality people with us today. One of the things we always talk about with the GC Advantage program and our coaching and advising program, there's no better person to tell the story than someone who sat in the seat. So today you're going to have the chance to roll up your sleeves, ask any questions you want, and get some really great direct answers. So with all that said, we'll get started. You may have noticed our titles changed a bit through our process here, and it's evolved as people have asked for different types of information and value coming from the panelists. And today we ultimately settled on how general counsel create value in the boardroom. And one of the things that we are constantly hearing from CEOs, public company CEOs, when we're out looking for new general counsel, is they're really looking for someone who has been board tested and not board ready. They want someone who understands and can be helpful in directing the CEO and others on the leadership team with the board. So this webinar is going to prove to be extremely valuable to everyone. So again, our GC Advantage program, we put this on monthly as a complimentary professional development program. It's ideal for anybody in an in-house law department or a compliance leader. We do have the program on demand for future viewing. So just this program is being recorded, as you all are aware. Please hold on to questions about, will this program be recorded? What will happen afterward or take a couple of weeks? You'll get an email that'll direct you directly to the website link that you can replay the good words that you're hearing today. And I have to say, in August, we're taking the month of July off, but in August, we have an incredible webinar as well. Dave Yallman, who was the general counsel of PepsiCo, he also sits on another executive coaching organization besides BarkerGilmore, and he actually is going to have the founder and president of that coaching organization. So any of the questions you might have as far as the value that coaching can bring you, it's going to be just a dynamite webinar to attend. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions. We expect a high volume of questions. Kristin Campbell is going to be leading the webinar. She'll be directing to questions as they come in. So we'll try to get to some of these questions. And once the webinar is completed, we'll try to go back and review some of the questions and answer as many as we can and get that information out to everyone. So we're going to do our best to answer everyone's questions. And now's my time to turn it over to Kristin. We are extremely fortunate today. Kristin is, she's a rock star. There's no questions asked. Former general counsel of Hilton and board member of two great organizations, the ODP, which is better known as Office Depot, and Regency Centers. So Kristin has some great insight. And then our other partner from our coaching and advising, Laura Schumacher. And I'm going to leave the rest to Kristin to introduce herself and the others, and enjoy the webinar. I hope you get a lot from it.
Great. Thank you, John. It is really a pleasure to be here today. And thank you so much for that, that kind intro. I kind of feel like Billy Idol should be jumping into the back of my screen saying, you are not a rock star. You have to really be a rock star to really be a rock star. I don't know if you guys have seen those commercials, but they're really cute. Again, a pleasure to be here today. You know, if there's one thing I love talking about, it is boards and how legal departments, legal teams, general counsels, and other professionals in our space interface with boards of directors. And I think another thing I love talking about is being on a board and how I think legal professionals in particular can you know, can be a really important voice in the boardroom as a board member. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I won't spend a lot of time, actually, really any time on my background because it's in front of you, but I did want to introduce our wonderful panelists today. First, I'll start with Cindie Jamison. I know Cindie from being on the board of the ODP Corporation with her. She's a dear friend and I think is exactly the kind of board member that I always wanted to work with when I was sitting in the general counsel's role. And she's also been a great kind of mentor to me as I kind of entered the world of public company board, you know, being on a public company board. Cindie is currently, in addition to being on the ODP Corp board, she's the chair of Big Lots and the chair of the Darden Restaurants board, which is probably means she gets free breadsticks for life, but I'll let her tell you that. So, Cindie, maybe just a few words about your career. You always tend to start talking about your career by saying that you were a crisis CFO, and I think a lot of people in our audience can relate to being, you know, kind of a crisis professional. So maybe just about your background.
Sure. Well, I will start by saying I guess I'm the diversity play for this group because I'm not a lawyer. I came up through the finance wing. I did a lot of traditional finance roles, became my public company CFO for the first time in the early 2000s. And in fact, that company went into crisis, which is how I ended up sort of morphing into a crisis CFO. Was completely unintentional. But after that concluded, I actually became a partner in a firm called Tatum Partners, which is interim CFO work. And interim can be something good happening or something bad happening, usually something unexpected happening. But in most cases, 90% of the cases, it was some kind of a crisis. And so I was a partner there for about 11 years, and then I ran the CFO practice. So I had the pleasure, quote unquote, of having 300 CFOs report to me. I joined my first board in 2002. I've been on 8 boards. I have chaired 3 and otherwise tend to be on the audit committee because of my CFO background.
Yes, yeah. And I'm grateful for that as well. Thank you, Cindie.
Sure.
Laura Schumacher is a new friend of mine and a colleague of mine at BarkerGilmore, being another one of the strategic advisors and coaches, and it's been a pleasure getting to know her over the past several months. Laura is on some big boards as well, you know, having, I think, recently joined the boards of General Dynamic and CrowdStrike as she was transitioning out of her GC career. But Laura, you were in a fascinating, what I think is a very fascinating industry in pharma, and probably could introduce yourself as a crisis CLO among other things as well. But why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Thanks, Kristin. Yeah, first of all, I would most definitely call myself a crisis CLO. It was just, I spent 35 years in healthcare, almost 20 of which serving as a general counsel of 2 Fortune 100 companies. You know, the healthcare industry is a highly regulated, highly focused upon, highly controversial at times industry. And I like to say, there's not too many things that I didn't experience during my tenure as CLO. I recently retired from that position. I have actually served on the board of directors of General Dynamics for 10 years. Oh, wow. I am currently serving as the lead director for General Dynamics, and I'm also serving on the board of CrowdStrike, which I joined in 2020. So I've got a good amount of experience both in the boardroom as the CLO and also as a board member at both of these 2 public boards.
Great. Thank you. Well, it's great to have both of you. And, you know, I think we've got a great lineup for things. It's I don't know what just happened, but let me just try this again. Very interesting. We just We just got a first question in our live chat, and just for the person who provided that, thank you. We are absolutely 100% going to get to your question in a moment. But before that, I thought we would kick off with just maybe to, get our panelists thinking about really the role of a board in today's environment. I mean, when you think about the kind of the arc of a public company board's evolution over the past 20, 30, certainly 40 and 50 years, things have really changed. We've gone from, a board where you would typically find a bunch of friends of the CEO and probably those who might rubber stamp the CEO's strategy and operational activities on a regular basis. I think that's pretty much the old way of doing things, and things have certainly evolved, since then. And it's funny, I spent a lot of time watching the Financial News Network and one of the financial news networks, and every single hour of every day they're talking about, just today they were talking about Tesla's board and what must they be thinking there, and what are they going to do about things at Tesla. So I think the role of boards in today's public companies have really changed. So I thought I'd kick off by asking our panelists a little bit about, how do you see the role of a board in today's world? And Cindie, why don't we kick off with you?
Sure. Well, I guess at the highest level, I think of the board as sort of the governor and guardian on behalf of the shareholders over the company and what it's doing. And I think that primarily involves ensuring that you have the right CEO and management team, and then the right strategy. But I think those are often quoted as sort of the two biggest priorities of the board. I think under that, though, when you kind of get to tactics as opposed to flying so high, it's really about having sort of the right priorities, making sure that the CEO and his team have the right priorities, that they are compliant with all of the various and sundry things they need to be compliant with, and that they're thinking about risk management on a very broad scale on behalf of all stakeholders. They're thinking in all directions about risk management and how the company tackles that, because there is so much risk and it's constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly. Laura, what's your take on that?
I think I would say the roles and responsibilities of a board have remained relatively constant in terms of the oversight, responsibility, and so on. The visibility of a board has changed dramatically. And some of that is from some of the regulatory changes in terms of director skill matrices, proxy access rules, a lot of things that allow shareholders and the public at large to have more visibility to the board. I can remember back when I first became a GC, which was 20 plus years ago, the board had those responsibilities, but the visibility of the board was much different than the visibility of the board today. And I think there is an expectation of board accountability for the company and for all of the various things that Cindie outlined, where they had that responsibility before. But I think the demand for accountability at the board level and the visibility of who the board is and what the board is doing has changed dramatically.
Yeah. And I think she's right. And I think with visibility comes judgment, right? Like to your point, Kristin, of sitting and listening to news programs where it isn't just what's the board thinking. Half the time it's, why are the boards idiots?
Well, and also, you made the comment about way back when maybe the board was a collection of individuals that had some connection to the CEO. Those days are long, long gone. And in part, that's, again, because of the demands for visibility and accountability. And each board member, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but each board member needs to present a basket of skills and experiences that advantages the whole. It's not just I'm so-and-so's friend, or I was at so-and-so's club, or whatever. Now it's, why are you on this board? How do you add value to this board? The board evaluation processes have changed dramatically too. So I think there's a lot of things that have moved in terms of boards and where and how they operate today.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, living in a world of, globalization and, really just almost complete transparency, uh, be it through traditional media or more likely through social media channels or whatever. I think the stakes have really never been higher for board members to bring the kind of value that you both are talking about. And it's, and we're not really talking here about like the fiduciary responsibilities under Delaware law. That's all like table stakes. This is all really about bringing your best game and your best experience and your best talent to the table. And that's why I actually think, and we'll get to this in a minute, I'm biased, obviously, because I have a legal background, but I think lawyers make fantastic board members for lots of reasons. Let's, in fact, why don't we maybe get into that just a little bit? Because the very first question we had was something that we had planned to talk about for sure, which is, as legal professionals, we all spend a lot of time working with our boards. And so naturally, I think a lot of GCs and other lawyers, we have an interest in joining a for-profit, a for-profit board. And, so I think we can have a really interesting, robust discussion because there's a lot of considerations that would go into this. And the one thing I think is the sort of a launching pad for this discussion should be, is board work really right for you? Because it might seem glamorous, and it might seem interesting for sure, but it may not really be right for everybody. So, Laura, why don't we come back to you again? How do you make an assessment as to whether or not really public company board work is right for you?
For me personally, or just
I think anybody, just,
I guess I would start with, because we as chief legal officers, like you said earlier, because we interact with the board so much, it's kind of feels a natural avenue for lawyers. And one of the things that I certainly have found is there's definitely a preconception that makes it more difficult for a lawyer to get on a public board, because if someone thinks of a lawyer as a legal functionary, then you think, well, I already have one of those because I have a general counsel. So
Right.
if I'm bringing a person on the board for just their functional expertise in the law, it's not necessary. And I think that cuts across all boards, all boardroom discussion. But the thing that I find so interesting is, as lawyers, the law is certainly the core of, sort of that's how we entered the room. But most chief legal officers, GCs, whatever, are senior level strategic advisors and executives. And if they're actually really engaged both in their job and their company, there's so much more than the best lawyer at the table. They're not the GC because they were the smartest lawyer. Oftentimes they're the GC because they're the best thinker. The law teaches us how to think about both sides of things, how to anticipate issues, how to see around the corner. And all of those skills are very, very important to be a valuable board member. We're not just in the boardroom so that we can answer a legal question. In fact, I'm quite certain that you probably don't answer legal questions, and nor do I. In the boardroom.
Specifically do not answer them, and I defer them to the general counsel. Right.
I'm not there to provide my legal opinion. I'm there to, I do have one often, but it's more the basket of skills you bring. And so to your question about what makes it right for you or what makes it right for someone is, I think, to start with asking, why do you want to be on a board? Why and how do you think you will add value? If we say that adding value isn't just being the smartest lawyer in the room, because there's a GC, and oftentimes if it's a big issue, there's outside lawyers. What are the levers that you will bring to a rich board conversation? And I would argue that they are more along the lines about how you solve problems, how you
Right.
think about things, how you anticipate issues, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Cindie, as the non-lawyer on the panel, it would be interesting to hear your viewpoint on, what you think lawyers can bring, to the board.
Yes, and I also want to go back to your first question too about is board work right for everybody. But I do think some lawyers bring a lot of strategic thinking to the boards. I'm sure the two of you do. I've also experienced it where, and by the way, I have experienced this with CFOs as well, where they are a little bit too down in the weeds. With lawyers, it's process. With CFOs, it tends to be accounting. But and I think when you're interviewing for a board, that's a landmine you want to avoid right away by elevating your answers to be very strategic and at a level that you are thinking through from a multifaceted perspective the problems of the company as a whole, and not just focusing on some of the legal issues or some of the legal risks. And I think if you come across that way in an interview, that can be the deal breaker. But as I said, I think a good lawyer brings a great strategic insight that kind of blends well with risk management. I think that's what the background gives you. I also think it's sort of unfair and interesting that CFOs are kind of like catnip for boards, specifically because of the audit committee. And yet
Right.
NomGov should be catnip for lawyers. I mean,
Right.
that it's so, you guys are experts in governance. I don't know why this attachment hasn't been made to that committee the way that audit committees have been made for CFOs, because you guys bring a wealth of knowledge about governance. And I think that's really important because, that's what activists will go after.
Yeah, exactly.
First thing, if they come after the company, it's governance practices that they usually highlight. And so, I'm going to right now say you guys need to do a PR campaign on behalf of lawyers and governance and NomGov committees.
I think we need to go to Capitol Hill and talk to Gary Gensler about this because it's
I'm sort of hopeful that with more examples of, and experiences, because you think about, Kristin's experiences or my experiences, multiply it by the other 10 board members that are in the boardroom with us at each of these companies, the more experience there are, the more examples there are, the more, I'm hoping that will have the effect of opening perspectives and opening eyes to the very skill sets that a good lawyer or a good GC CLO brings.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
I do want to go back to is a board right for you though, because there's a couple of things I just wanted to highlight. And you guys probably know this, you guys being the audience, if you are boardroom savvy, but if and when something happens, you lose control of your calendar and your time completely. I mean, you can start having meeting after meeting after meeting, and you have to be there. You have to show up. I've had to cancel vacations. I had in one case a forensic accounting issue on an audit committee. I had to move to the company for 10 days and just live in a conference room. So you just kind of never know when things are going to go sideways, and you have to accept that as part of the package. And then I would say the other two areas that I would mention is the whole, it's so often quoted, but the whole nose in, fingers out is very hard for some people. I mean, it's a very catchy phrase, but it's very hard for some people, especially on that first board. I mean, you're used to running projects and being the expert and having your fingers so deep in things that you almost have this unconscious need to be deeper to feel like you're completely understanding. And so you have to kind of learn to elevate to just ask probing questions, but be okay without understanding all of the details. And the third area I would mention that doesn't work for everybody is it's a group of peers. I mean, you're operating as an entity, and even the chair is really just a first among equals. It isn't a hierarchical kind of thing. And so, if you're an individual contributor and you like running your own show and you like marching to your own drum, board work probably is going to be a challenge. So those are some things I think people should consider.
Yeah, and I will add to that because and Cindy's heard me talk about this a lot. I chair the governance committee at the ODP Corporation, and we always talk about, board members needing to fly at the right altitude, right? Just like an airplane at on any given trip. You can't be too high. You can't be flying 100,000 feet all the time because, then you're really not bringing any value at all. But you also can't be storming the barn and and getting as, Cindie, I've never heard that phrase before, fingers and nose out, but I get it. If, as you say, if you are someone who really likes to be into the tactics of things, likes to be in the day-to-day decision making, and really wants to have more operational input and oversight, then maybe board work is not really the right thing for you. One other last editorial thing I'd ask, or I'd add is, just in terms of it being a little bit harder for lawyers to get on boards, probably, oh gosh, maybe 15 years ago when I first tried to get on a board, I met with the CEO. It was right in my wheelhouse. It had my background, it kind of had my name all over it. And I was general counsel of Hilton at the time, and the guy just, he couldn't have been nicer. He said, "Kristin, I've got a GC. I don't need another one." And I didn't have a good response for that. And it took me another 5 years to figure out the way to position that. So this is more of a tactical piece of advice. But I stopped describing myself as I'm a general counsel, I'm a lawyer. I would describe myself now as an experienced, seasoned executive that just happens to have a law degree. And then I would really focus on my strategic, my background in, strategic planning and strategic execution, risk management, crisis management, compliance, all the things that go with that I'm a lawyer label, but that don't quite have that, unfortunately, some of the negative, implications. So let's talk about how you guys got on your first boards. Laura, so you've been on General Dynamics for 10 years. I did not realize that. That's amazing. How did that come about? Because you were obviously probably working real hard at the time.
Yeah, well,
your day job.
yeah, exactly. The opportunity to go on the General Dynamics board came about from interactions that I had in my role, my GC role, with one of our board members who became the CEO of General Dynamics. So when she started out on our board, she was not the CEO. And the interactions that I had with her weren't necessarily, again, to your point, they weren't necessarily about answering her legal questions. Actually, we as an organization were going through a transition where we were making a strategic decision to separate the company into two separate companies. And as such, in my role, I was part of the team that was involved in analyzing and making that decision. And this segues a little into sort of following up on what you were just saying, which is it starts with how you decide the kind of lawyer and how you decide to actually manage your career. Because if you sit in the back and you wait until someone asks you a legal question, you're not going to have the opportunity to have had experiences in other areas. And so coming back to this, yes, I was on the team of a very small team. It was the CEO and the CFO and myself that were analyzing it. But I took that opportunity to really engage in understanding what was the strategic rationale and how would the investors look at this and so on. And that impressed her, so that a couple years later, when she had an opening on her board, she called me and said, "Listen, I was really impressed with your work on this strategic transaction, but also I think for you in your own career and professional development, being on a board is going to be great training for, the executive that you are today and the executive that you want to be tomorrow." So while it was kind of interaction or networking, if you want to call it, it wasn't networking because we sat next to one another in the boardroom. It was how we interacted and how I interacted with her. So I didn't have to say I'm not just a lawyer. And, she knew that because she had seen that and had that experience.
Yeah, that's a really great story. It's sort of, the lesson there is, just act like a board member, right? And it'll shine right through.
Like a board member. I think, one of the things for me with my staff was that I would never tolerate when someone would say, "That's a business question." Okay, They're all business questions. Some of them might have a specific legal element to it, but walking away from a question because it's a business question is a huge mistake.
Yeah, agreed. Cindie, any thoughts on that? On the particular question?
On my first board, how'd I get on my first board?
Yeah.
Well, my story is not going to help anybody, but it's kind of cute. I guess it is, at the crux of it, I guess it is a networking. The short answer would be networking, but I did not have board service anywhere in my sights. I was 42 years old. I was just doing my day job, heads down. But it was when I was a partner in that crisis management firm. And so a company in Colorado was looking for a board member. They wanted a financial background. They reached out to their lawyer. Their lawyer reached out to my company. My company, back in the day, the internet was so nascent at this point, had an intra-company site. So they put it kind of a blast thing out, and my managing partner said, yes, I have someone like this. And the specific thing they were looking for, which is why it's not going to really help anyone, is the CEO said to the board, go find the financial expert that you need, but would you do me a favor and make it a mom with young kids? Because our product, it was Horizon Organic. So it was the organic dairy that little kids, moms like to buy for their kids. And so they did a search. They found me. I interviewed. I absolutely thought there was no chance in the world I was going to get it, because I thought I was 10 years too young. But it turns out, I found out later, actually, they couldn't find anybody else. I was the only nutcase that was, 42 years old with small kids, being a public company CFO. And so that's how I got my first board. But I did think it was interesting because it was ahead of when people sort of thought that way about wanting to have their consumer in their boardroom. Yeah. And, and I think that has been one of the evolutions that we've seen in terms of composition in boardrooms, that, we do try to have diversity and also representation of who's actually using this product and how can they connect to this and the issues that we're facing. So
Right.
That's how I got it.
Interesting. Well, and I'll just add a quick of my own anecdote if it's helpful to folks, but I think it shows that there's really no recipe for all of this, because all of our stories are going to be a little bit different. I really landed my first seat, and that's the seat at the ODP company, because my former boss from my role back at Staples a long time ago recommended me, put my name in the hat. And so, he and I had lots of working experience together. He had experienced me as someone with sound judgment and had, big picture thinking and so forth. And so he was very comfortable putting my name in the hat. So there's lots of different ways to think about going about doing it. But I do think you start with the first question, which is, do I really want to do this? Because, it is work. There is some potential liability associated with it. We all know about that. It's not really necessarily for everyone. Laura, did I see you were about to say something, or?
No.
Okay, cool. So
I will say, Kristin, I'm just going to add to your story because I thought it was funny. Obviously I know the person you're talking about, and when he recommended you, didn't he tell you, but you're on your own?
Yeah, he did. It was interesting. He said, I think you'd be great for this board. But I don't want to be seen as putting my hand on the scale. Good luck, you're on your own. So it all worked out. So one just real quick question here. We've kind of already answered it, but just to wrap this segment up, any tactics for how to get started? We have one question from the audience about, especially if you're more junior in your career, you're not really at the GC state yet, like, how do you start thinking about this when you're early on, or different phases of your career, and what skills do you want to be thinking about building as you are, if your long-term goal might be to get on a public board?
Well, I think the first most important thing is just to try to get into a boardroom, even if you're not the GC, you may be under that level, but ask to be part of some kind of a conversation occasionally. Just get yourself into the room. where you have the opportunity to observe. And then again, this may not be as important for this group because you do understand governance, but I do recommend for people who are several layers down and starting to think about this in their future, going ahead and looking at the NACD certification. Because just the study guide fills in a lot of blanks for a lot of people, what all the committees are, what they do. There are multiple choice questions followed by actual sort of case study, you know, where you hear part of the case, you answer some questions about, then you get more information, you have to answer more questions. It sort of twists and turns, and it tests your ability to think the way a board member has to think as things sort of unfold in front of you. And
Yeah.
I think that certification is starting to get some traction. And I think it does say on your resume that you've done the work to at least understand the basics of boardroom dynamics.
No,
So I
that's
always suggest that.
So I was kind of thinking along the same lines as Cindie, which is, you know, first of all, if you're, depending where you are in the organization, if you're a relatively junior attorney, then the first thing is to, again, ask yourself why, you know, but secondly is to start having dialogues with people that can give you some exposure to get into the boardroom in some way, whether it's a presentation on an issue or a project or whatever, but also endeavor to really learn what a board does, because I think, you know, there's this notion that if we're lawyers, we must understand what boards do because we learned about governance or some aspects of governance when we were in law school. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's so much to know and so much to learn. And there's a lot of PLI courses too. Talk about, you know, compensation committees or boards or hot issues for boards. Start educating yourself on understanding what do boards do and what are the expectations for board members.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I might add on, Kristin, is, you know, we talked a little bit about that unfortunate perception that a lawyer is just a lawyer. And I think that the more you can become an expert in something else, whether say AI or ESG or something that's topical, you know, where you can say, you know, but I also have this, and this will bring value to your board.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Okay, well, why don't we pivot a little bit to, okay, we're all sitting around the board table now. What's happening inside the room? And I think it's fair to say there's a ton going on in boardrooms right now. You know, I mentioned earlier about literally we're just talking about the Tesla board today. We've heard a lot about you know, crises at companies recently where the board is either the focus of negative sentiment, or certainly has to deal with negative sentiment about the company, such as Walt Disney, which just had a big proxy fight, or Boeing, you know, where they've clearly had some performance issues, to say the least, and certainly putting some pressure on the board. So let's talk a little bit about how boards are managing some of the big issues. And Cindie and Laura, before I ask you, you know, what you think are some of the big issues, we had an interesting question come in that looks like a number of people would find interesting to have an answer to. So the question is, you know, how would you recommend responding if a board is not acting on negative findings in a culture audit when the CEO is the focus of negative responses? So that's a very specific question. And hopefully one that doesn't come up too much, but I think it's a pretty important one, because I think it goes to what we talked about earlier about the role of boards changing. That's what I would have expected to happen, you know, back in 1975, but not so much in 2024. Any thoughts about that?
It's hard to, given the focus on human capital management now, it's hard for me to imagine a board not responding to something like that. So my first question would be, does the board know? Does the board know that there was a negative culture survey that specifically called out the CEO? Because, you know, there is a lot of, one of the most important things a board does is the oversight of, you know, of the CEO and of the overall organization. And culture surveys are an important part of the board trying to understand what's really going on within the organization. So I guess my first reaction would be, in the context of that question, does the board have access to that culture survey, and does the board really know about that and or know about the CEO's role? And if the answer to that is no, maybe not, the board doesn't really know, then I would suggest, depending where you are in the organization, that you talk to the general counsel, who is most definitely in the boardroom all the time, about how to ensure that the board is aware of what's going on with the culture of the organization. Because one of the difficult things as a board member is you meet 6 or 7 times a year, and a lot of the information that you get is coming to you either from the CEO or from members of management, and obviously it is what they are sharing with you. So as a board member, you know, one of the things that I try to do is to spend time talking to people on the management team about what's going on within the organization and how are they feeling about their job and so on. So I think it goes both ways. One, does the board know? And then two, the board, you know, the board needs to want to understand what's going on within the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
Well, so I think I'm going to make the assumption that the board does know or finds out.
Yeah.
And then I think that's really a call for the leadership on the board to step in. And I would imagine, you know, a hefty number of executive sessions should start to occur to discuss these findings. I've never had this particular situation, but I had something pretty close to it, which is we had a retiring CEO on one of the boards that I was on, and we were selecting his successor, and we had an internal candidate. That was a pretty much, you know, he had been supported by the recently retiring CEO. He was kind of his guy. He had been at the company a long time. He was in a strong leadership role. And so we were kind of doing a little bit of a scan externally, but frankly headed down the path of elevating this guy. And I myself received a couple of phone calls, a few other board members did as well, from some of the people in the C-suite saying, you got the wrong guy, please don't do this. And so we ended up pivoting on the search and going much more strongly external and digging in on this. And as more stuff was found out, we ended up terminating him as opposed to making him CEO. So there was a big pivot there. And you know, that was a real shocker. That was that kind of thing where you get some new information specifically from the company saying, you know, hey guys, you're missing it here. Pay attention. So pretty close.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you know, it's possible that the question is really driven around, you know, is what happens if a board sort of turns a blind ear or a blind eye to a situation they've been, you know, made aware of. And so, you know, I think, you know,
they do it at their own peril.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you really have that kind of a situation, clearly you want to speak with your outside counsel. You know, and probably certainly try to get board leadership. And if this is the general counsel who submitted that question, and you're in that very lonely general counsel box that we all found ourselves in from time to time, where you really couldn't talk to anybody about things, but you knew you had to like manage a solution somehow. You know, get some help, you know, whether it's from other executives, from leaders on the board, or from your outside counsel, your trusted outside counsel on that. So we have a couple of other questions, but I also wanted to just give our panelists a chance to talk a little bit about some of the things they're seeing in the boardroom. You know, activism, you know, how are boards feeling about AI, you know, hot topic these days. Laurel, just sort of throw it out there. You know, what are you finding as kind of the topic du jour, or something that your boards are focused on right now?
Well, you know, interestingly, cybersecurity.
That's right. That doesn't surprise me.
not just, I mean, one of the boards is CrowdStrike, who is a cybersecurity company, but I mean more broadly, in part, you know, because of the proposed regulations around cybersecurity and disclosures and so on. But I think as there's more and more awareness of the damage that a cybersecurity incident can have to a company, and it's highly technical. So I would say one of the big changes in the area of risk management is the focus. You know, cybersecurity is not just a check the box, like once a year we have an update on, you know, our chief information officer comes in and tells us everything's okay. But it's actually a very detailed discussion about that issue, you know, about how a company might respond if they find themselves in that situation. So I would say risk overall, of course, is a big topic, but narrowing down cyber risk is a big issue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that one has been around for a long time, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Yeah, especially with AI coming in. Yeah, Cindie, what are you? What
You
do
know,
you?
mine are, I'm largely retail and consumer-based companies, and we are very concerned about the consumer and the economy
Yep.
and the election. And it was interesting. I didn't mention this in my intro, but I just joined the board of Save the Children, which is a wonderful and very large nonprofit. And we had our latest meeting in DC, and they had someone high up in the Democratic Party and someone high up in the Republican Party come and talk to us about the various election outcomes, congressional as well as presidential. But it was so interesting to me because one of the women speaking, not one of the two, not the Democrat or the Republican, but one of the women commenting on it said, well, you know, I take some comfort that this isn't quite as polarizing as we think it is, or as concerning, because we live in the bubble of DC and nobody's really honestly concerned about this outside of the DC. And I was like, you are out of your mind. People are talking about this nonstop. The whole nation is concerned about this, whatever side you're on. So I think, you know, and I think they're connected, right? I think the consumer feels a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, not only with the political elections, but with geopolitical things that are going on as well. And so we have a lot of conversations about the consumer, what's going on with the consumer, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, why aren't they shopping? So I would say that takes up, in my boardrooms anyway, more time than AI. And we do cyber, but we do that in the audit committee in every meeting. So it's not business as usual, because cyber is never business as usual, but it is already baked in to our agendas.
Yeah, yeah. And Cindie, you mentioned earlier there, you know, that when we first started talking about the role of the board, the risk management on behalf of all stakeholders. And so a question has come in around, you know, what are the groups of stakeholders that you think directors should really be focused on? You know, I think years ago you might have said, oh, it's the shareholders, but I think there's so many, there's a real rainbow of broadly speaking stakeholders. So who do you think we all serve?
That's the $1 million philosophical question, right? So, I mean, I went to the University of Chicago, so I'm sort of a Milton Friedman guru. So probably the shareholder would always be number one to me. And I personally think you got to be really careful with social issues and causes. That's a little bit of a slippery slope, I would say, unless it really is an issue that is fundamental to your business, in which case you're sort of expected to take a stand. But I will say employees. I would put employees a close number two, and suppliers and vendors, because those are all sort of in the ecosystem. And I think if there's anything that's come out of COVID that has help the boardroom evolve, it's the appreciation of you know, employee dynamics and thinking through those issues. And in addition to hoping that more general counsels get on boards, I hope more CHROs get on boards, because I think we need to be taking the pulse a lot more closely as to how the employee population is feeling, and you know, what level of rigidity or lack thereof the company wants to impose in terms of, like, example, going back to work from home to work from work again, and things of that nature.
Yeah, yeah. Laura, any thoughts about that?
Well, I was going to point to the employees, you know, which is why the earlier question about the culture findings, more and more time is spent not just in the traditional role of a board, which would be succession planning or talking about management, or, you know, the kind of the senior leaders, but deeper into the organization, I think there's the recognition that a company is nothing but a collection of individuals, and everything about that company, who the company is and how the company performs, is going to be a function of having a good, strong employee base. And COVID has created a lot of challenges in a lot of different areas, with filling jobs, and presenting different challenges about what the work conditions might be, whether you're going to tolerate remote work or not remote work, all remote or part remote. And I think there's been a lot more focus on employees, deeper than just where boards tended to focus, which was succession planning for senior management positions.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we have so many questions that we're not going to have time to answer unless we extend this for another 3 or 4 hours, and I suspect that that's not going to work today. But I'm going to ask one last question before we close about one of the things that I've been feeling, or been observing in boardrooms, whether as the GC or as a board member, and that really is sort of the difference now between the reputational risk that a company, has to face as a result of all the transparency that we mentioned earlier, right? So the best example I can think of is I'm going to say now, it was early 2022, which is hard to believe, the day after Ukraine was invaded by Russia. I don't think there was a board in the United States that wasn't asking a number of questions about, is our business in Russia? Are we going to be impacted by what's happening in Russia? And do we need to get the heck out of Russia? And, what I observed happening through that very frothy discussion in boardrooms was really a board trying to balance the very difficult question of reputational risk and performance risk, because if your business was going to do fine in Russia, should you pull out because there's a potentially a higher principle at stake. So I'm not asking you to address that particular thing, but I'm just wondering if there are other sorts of push me, pull you moments that you've experienced in the boardroom.
Well, I can start on that one. I mean, I was on the Tractor Supply board for close to 20 years and chaired it for 9. And we had a very difficult decision to make, and we had a lot of, I love your adjective, frothy conversations about whether or not to carry guns in Tractor Supply stores, because it is a farm and ranch rural retailer. A lot of our clientele were gun owners, believers. And we ultimately made the very difficult decision, because we knew we were giving up revenue, to not carry firearms. It's very unpopular with some of our customers. Well, flash forward, our second largest store in the entire chain is in Uvalde, Texas. And when that school shooting happened, I was really glad that the guy did not buy the firearm at Tractor Supply. And as a matter of fact, we were able to fund all the funerals for the children. We gave the money to fund the funerals, so it allowed us to be in a position of helping, not hurting. Yeah. And it was really instructional for me. You never know where this stuff is going to go. You never know how it's going to turn out. That is obviously a terrible, terrible, unanticipated consequence, but it could have been incredibly draconian on our reputation as well. And so these are such complicated issues, and you really have to think through, what are all the eventualities on these reputational questions. But, I would say I don't have the answer to all of them, and every situation is different. But I would say just take them very seriously and think through the potentialities and what that could mean, because what could be a short-term boost in revenues could be a huge downside potentially down the road.
Exactly.
I would add to that it's, reputational risks are, of course, enormously important, but the board also works with the management team and the CEO in evaluating the risks. And so it requires a delicate balance between the board telling management what they're going to do or what they're going to say versus having an oversight role and supporting where management wants to be. And so I find reputational issues to be among the more difficult issues for boards to kind of sort out, like, what exactly am I supposed to be doing here versus, you know, where are you and what is the recommendation? So a good, strong, and close relationship between the board and the management helps enormously when confronting these different reputational issues.
I agree with Laura's point completely, 100%.
Great. Well, I know John's going to jump in, but before he does, I'm going to do a real quick rapid fire. And because I'm always trying to push travel because I loved Hilton and I still love Hilton so much. Cindie, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Martha's Vineyard. No Hilton there. Sorry, Kristin.
Yeah. Sadly. So at this point, and Laura, how about you?
London.
Fabulous. John, what's your favorite vacation spot?
I think my vacation spot is right in my backyard in Naples, Florida. So we don't have to go anywhere.
All right. Fair enough. All right, John, I'll
Well,
turn
you
this
guys,
back to you.
you guys were absolutely terrific. A few things I wanted to point out. I love being given an option when someone says, I don't need another lawyer. That's fantastic. I also love the advice, get into the boardroom to understand boardroom dynamics. I think that's fantastic. So you guys have given some really, really good tips. The one thing I want to point out, obviously, Kristin and Laura, that's what you guys do. You joined our firm because you're passionate about helping others improve. If anyone's looking, especially for how to better interact with the board, how they can create better value for the board or the CEO for the board, feel free to reach out. These women are incredible. And Cindie, how blessed are we today to have you join us? And I love that you just told story after story, and hearing real world stories makes a big difference. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. We had just a terrific showing today, which we anticipated. So I hope everyone did get some value. Again, we are going to address these questions. We'll try to get those out in addition to the recording that you should receive in the next few weeks. And again, please keep us in mind. Our August presentation with Dave Yarman, apologize, is going to be absolutely spectacular. Powering business success, building your influence as a leadership team member. These guys are not just coaching general counsel, they're coaching CEOs and CFOs, other C-suite members and board members. So you're going to be able to get and hear a lot of different perspective. So thank you again for attending. Hope you all got value out of it. If we can help you here at BarkerGilmore, whether you're looking to make a strategic hire, general counsel, or a member of the law department, or if you're looking for any coaching or advising, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be glad to help you out any way we can. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a great day.